think we might see when we're out on the bayou today?
Well, we're right at the cusp of spring on a beautiful, warm, cloudless day, and what we're hoping to see are basking alligators. We have perfect conditions for alligators who are coming out of a long winter's nap on a beautiful sunny spring day such as this to find a place for them to haul out of the water and pull themselves up and expose their full body length to the sunlight in an effort to try to warm their core temperature up. Alligators have been fasting since late fall. Probably October, November is the last time an alligator in Houston area bayous have had a meal. I think he even smiled.
So too. Wow.
Many people may not realize, located right in our own backyard is a collection of wildlife you more commonly associate with a national park. Hi, I'm Mark Kramer, Chief Naturalist of the Armand Bayou Nature Center, and today we're going to talk about the wildlife of Armand Bayou Nature Center.
And I'm Dr. Kathy Garland from the University of Houston at Clear Lake. I'm here today to talk to Mark and to learn more about some of the wonderful wildlife we have right here in our amazing area. So Mark, tell me, what lives out at Armand Bayou Nature Center?
Well, probably things you'd expect to be in a place like that. Lots of animals that are common to the area in general, like rabbits and squirrels and skunks and raccoons and possums and armadillos and a long list of those kinds of critters, but maybe a few animals that you might not expect to find in such a large urban area too.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of those animals? What kinds of things, what do we have there that's really special?
Largely they're apex predators, lots of big, powerful animals like bald eagles, river otters, American alligators, brown pelicans, peregrine falcons. Really astonishing to think that they're located right in our own backyard.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people in our area are unaware that we do have, for example, bald eagles here. I think of bald eagles as mountain birds, for one thing, and I think a lot of people do, although I've learned over time that they're actually found anywhere that there's a lot of fish, that they're a fish eagle.
They're very adaptable, large birds of prey, and it's the fact that they do largely eat fish but can also take other prey that enable them to live all across North America, from Alaska all the way down into the southern part of the continent. So very exciting for us as Houstonians and Americans to have bald eagles return right here to our neighborhood.
It reminds me of years ago when I first learned about them, I was wondering I'm thinking about bald eagles, and again, I always sort of picture them up on the top of a mountain. Somebody told me that the state that has the largest concentration of bald eagles is Illinois.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, because of the Great Lakes.
Well, that's a surprise.
Yeah, I was really shocked because I expected it to be, again, some really wild, distant state. I mean, nobody thinks of Chicago and bald eagles, but because Lake Michigan is there, apparently they have lots of them.
Wow.
Yeah, so I thought that was really cool. So you mentioned the river otter. I haven't seen those out at Armand Bayou Nature Center. Tell me a little bit more about them. Where do you find them in the Nature Center? I've only ever seen them in a zoo. Yeah.
Well, a lot of these critters are pretty elusive, meaning you don't see them very often. And when you do see them just for a matter of seconds. So, it's a prized viewing for an outdoors person to be able to see some of these animals. River otters, at least for me, have only been around and commonly seen for 20-25 years. They were largely gone from the Galveston Bay complex, but over time their populations recovered, and I saw them for the first time at the Nature Center in 1994. So as someone who spends a lot of time outside, the very first time you have a viewing of any of these animals that I'm talking about, it's a memory. It creates a memory. And so, the first time I saw a river otter at Armand Bayou, very special moment.
That would be great. I would love to see those. I don't know that people realize, we see a lot of brown pelicans here. I think people do realize that the bald eagle was an endangered species. But I don't think a lot of people even realize that the brown pelican was equally threatened, and for the same reasons.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of those birds, particularly back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, were threatened by a type of pesticide that we were using on our agricultural areas, on our crops and farmlands.
That was DDT, right?
Yeah, we sprayed it on large areas. And as the rains fall, you know, we all live in a watershed, and all of that water flows downstream. And because many of those pesticides have a long lifespan, a legacy pesticide, they work their way into the water, into the food chain, and often have the most damaging effects to those species right at the top of the food chain or food pyramid. And those are the bird species that we were just describing: pelicans, falcons, eagles, ospreys, which really weren't ever on the endangered list but very close to it. That chemical compromised the bird's reproductive system, making it difficult for them to process calcium, which in large part is what bird egg shells are made from.
Right.
So it weakened the bird egg shells, and whenever the parent birds would incubate eggs on the nest to keep them warm, the shells would
They
crack.
crack the eggs.
That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah, I remember that.
So very little reproduction for those birds for a number of years.
Right. And how did they actually survive, do you know? Is it there were just some of them who managed to not get so much into their systems? Perhaps they were far enough away from the from the source of that pesticide?
Well, there's a little bit different answer to each one of those species, but certain areas of the country had much less agricultural production. For example, Alaska, we don't grow a lot of crops up there in the frozen Nordic tundra, you know.
Right, that's
And
true.
as a result, we had a residual population of all of these species in satellite areas around agricultural production. So what happened slowly is, for example, the eagle made its way back in from parts surrounding the Houston area. The brown pelican did the same thing, and in fact we actually imported some brown pelicans from other parts of the state and Mexico to bring to here. Louisiana had a fair population of brown pelicans back in the 70s. There was a small group on the recovery team that brought brown pelicans to the Galveston Bay area.
So they were actually mostly threatened right here in Texas, as opposed to everywhere on the Gulf Coast?
Well, brown pelicans largely were threatened on the Gulf Coast, and they stay here and breed here. Okay. So all those agricultural fields in the watersheds north of Galveston Bay and all down the Gulf Coast, that runoff affected brown pelicans because they stayed here all year. White pelicans are only winter residents,
right,
so because
right.
they migrated away, they did not have that same
the same issue. I see. Because I know we do have a tremendous amount of agricultural runoff that comes into our watershed here, comes into the Gulf, and of course we happen to be downstream from the Mississippi.
Right.
We're downstream, basically in the Gulf of Mexico from the influx of all those agricultural chemicals that come in with the Mississippi. So I know we get a lot more of them here in Texas than they would, say, in Alabama or Florida,
right.
because the water is basically moving this direction.
Right.
Now, are we going to basically see these animals anytime we come and visit the nature center? Is that how that's going to work, or I mean, how do we? What would we be sure to see if we went there?
Well, what you'll be sure to see is a big, beautiful open space, probably one of the most beautifully preserved natural areas in the Houston metropolitan area. That is the habitat, the foundation for all these animals to live where you will be visiting. The unknown portion of it is, of course, it's not a zoo. So you can't be guaranteed that you'll see any of these animals. And you know, the likelihood is better if you go with a guide, or if you go on a guided pontoon boat trip, or if you go with someone who knows where to look for some of these species. So no guarantees, but you know, as you come, you're also supporting the preservation of these places, the habitat that these types of animals need. And it's really quite a success story as the years have progressed. Because of federal regulations and several other elements, many of those species that were impacted so seriously back in the 60s and 70s now have made full recovery. Many of these animals have gone from being endangered to now being taken for granted right here in Pasadena. You may walk out here a dozen times and never see these animals, However, many of them are on exhibit at the Nature Center.
Two of our wonderful student filmmakers took their cameras out to Armand Bayou Nature Center to interview Kristen Hill, who takes care of the animals on display. Let's watch.
Hello, I'm Dakota Dickey, and I'm here with Kristen Hill, and she's the animal care specialist here at Armand Bayou Nature Center. Who do you have here?
This is our speckled king snake. They're part of a very large family of king snakes. They are called king snakes because they eat other snakes and they are impervious to venom, so they can eat copperheads and water moccasins.
Okay, and how big do these guys get?
They get to be about 3 to 4 feet is the max.
Okay, and how old is this one? Do you know?
This one we've had since about 2006 or so. Someone actually found it out here and we brought it in, and we've been using her ever since.
And how do you tell a king snake from another non-venomous snake?
It's difficult to tell, especially since there's so many different varieties. We also have our prairie king snake. This one in particular has very distinct color, and you can see the navy blue and black on top with the goldish speckles, and then the bottom is very, very yellow. They also have the nickname salt and pepper snakes because of that, but that's how you can identify this specific species.
And how do these guys kill their prey?
Since they don't have venom, they're constrictors. So what they do once they realize what prey they want, they strike at it and they immediately wrap their body around it. And once their prey takes a breath, they squeeze even harder until they eventually suffocate their prey and then they consume it.
Okay, what else can you tell us about this guy?
They live in a wide range of habitats, from lowlands to prairies to forest. This snake in particular prefers wet forests, so that's why they love it here at Armand Bayou, since we have our coastal flatwoods forest. They're very, very opportunistic hunters in the wild. They'll eat frogs, lizards, snakes, rodents.
A lot of people have no idea that these incredible animals live right here in our community. Mark, why do they live here? Why can they live here in this area? What can you explain to us about that?
Well, the simplest answer is that it's good habitat. There's habitat that is required by each one of these different species, and it's high quality. It's good habitat for all of them.
So what do you really mean by habitat?
It's a kind of a complex equation that each species on Earth has unique requirements in order for them to be healthy, just like you, just like me, just like Habitat for Humanity. So that's the simplest fifth grade explanation for it, is that Habitat for Humanity is your house, and within your house there are unique rooms that provide different services for you to be happy and healthy and comfortable. Keep it simple. Kitchen is obvious in the form of wildlife. That'd be feeding habitat. You need a place to raise your children, which would be nursery habitat. You might have a bedroom with a crib in it. You need a place just to relax, just kind of like we are on the couch right now.
Yeah.
A place where you can kick back.
Out here by our parking lot, where you can, in any evening, see the deer who seem to be just relaxing after a long day of avoiding the cars and grazing. They're just laying in the grass under the trees. They look like students.
Absolutely. It's lounging habitat, and it's a real thing. Animals need it just like you and I do. And what happens over time, on occasion, is that one of those elements can become disrupted or degraded, and that means that species suffer. If any one of those, of the habitat mosaic, which is really what we're describing with all rooms of the house, then it may mean that populations begin to decline. But by contrast, over time, habitats at Armand Bayou Nature Center have improved over the decades through ecological restoration, a whole host of
Mostly
different
through your efforts.
Well, a lot of it's a masterpiece that's been painted by a number of different human hands.
Oh,
through
that's
all
a great
those
way
decades.
to think of it, yeah.
And it truly is that. It has created an assembly of plant communities which support these apex predators and other beautiful animals that are here. The collection of them in their entirety equals very high quality habitat. And those are good biological indicators. You see nesting bald eagles. Wow, what an indicator that the habitat is healthy.
Yeah. You know, I was, over the weekend I saw a film. Was in actually New Mexico, and it was a film about creating continental wildways. And it talks about this concept of continuity and connectivity of habitats. And it also talked about the fact that, you know, we kind of have protected areas, and then we have non-protected areas, and we have another protected areas, and we sort of have this patchwork of these protected areas. And that for some animals, apparently, without that connectivity, they can't really exist in a habitat like this, and others can. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, the concept that you're talking about is often referred to as rewilding.
Right.
And so
Yeah,
what
exactly.
we do, did you hear that in the film?
Exactly.
Okay.
In fact, the name of it was Born to Rewild.
Oh, okay.
That was the name of the,
Nice.
the event.
I haven't
Yeah.
heard of that. But so what happens, we talked about habitat. What happens in an urban area is that habitats become not necessarily degraded, but they can become fragmented. So habitat fragmentation can happen at a local level, such as Armand Bayou Nature Center, where we're an island ecosystem surrounded by suburbia. Or it can happen at a continental level, which is what I suspect the film was about. And you have large areas like Yellowstone and the prairie conservation areas of Nebraska, and you need to have connected thoroughfares or migration routes for animals, large animals, migratory animals like bison, for example. And in order for them to be healthy, you have to connect the dots of that fragmented habitat. And, you know, in the perfect world, when you're imagining how to rewild an area, there's a pathway for all those animals to kind of get from point A to point B.
Right. So are there animals we would have here if we had better connectivity?
Boy, it's as much as it's fun to go back in time and time travel, at least in our area, because it is so totally developed. It would be hard to imagine how we could move bison from Armand Bayou Nature Center to the Katy Prairie, for example.
Right.
Largely because there's so much private property, it's so urbanized, industrialized, so forth. Other parts of the country may be easier.
So, well, for example, deer. I mean, I know that deer tend to have a standard pathway, for example, that they follow on a diurnal cycle on a daily basis, that they actually move from one habitat to another at specific times of the day. And of course, if there's a road in between, they're going to cross that road at that specific time. Are there other animals that are like that?
Well, yes. You know, one of the real advantages of having that connectivity has to do with biological diversity, genetic diversity specifically. So when you talk about deer, their range is only about 1 square mile. That's about
Really?
600 acres. They really don't travel very far.
Oh, I didn't know. I thought it was bigger than that.
But what happens is, for example, if you have an isolated island ecosystem that's cut off from other genetic diversity, then those genes become isolated. Over time, populations suffer when there's not that exchange of genes from larger pools moving around. That would be one major advantage of us being able to, you know, have more connectivity in our area.
Yeah. Well, I think you know, I think it's fascinating to me because, of course, here at the university, we're actually connected to you guys. I mean, we have connection to Armand Bayou Nature Center through just some greenways that are there kind of almost by accident, just because they put a water treatment plant in there and because we preserve part of our property as a conservation area. So I often wonder, you know, how many of your animals are moving, how many animals that I see at Armand Bayou Nature Center will I see the next day here, and how many of them will I see here that, you know, actually are going to head your way later on in the same day?
Right. Well, I'm sure there's some of that. Some of our properties have fences on our boundaries, and some of them are divided by natural barriers, such as waterways. I actually saw deer swimming across Horsepen Bayou this weekend from Nature Center property onto University of Houston property. So it's kind of funny to hear you make these comments. The animals move around when they can.
Sure.
Sometimes there's advantages to them moving, as I'm describing. Sometimes those fences play a great role in keeping animals out that are unwanted, such as feral hogs. So there's kind of a, you know, a double-edged sword to being isolated versus connected.
Yeah, and you know, this is something we'll have to talk about probably another time, but we talk on one hand about endangered species, and then we talk about invasive species.
Right.
And you constantly have that competition for habitat between the two of them, and we're very fortunate that Armand Bayou Nature Center hasn't had to struggle with that very much, because so many other areas of our wild areas here in South Texas have struggled with the competition between what should be living there naturally and what is living there because it was introduced.
Absolutely. You know, invasive species are very high on the ecological issue list globally.
Yep.
So it could be a whole nother topic, I'm sure, in the future.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that. So I know that one of the ways that we are able to understand these animals a lot better is because there's a lot of research that goes on. There's a lot of different kinds of research out there, and research that is really, really important in order for us to understand, you know, how these animals move and what they do and why they're endangered. Could you tell our audience a little bit about some of the research that has taken place over time out at the Nature Center?
Sure. Well, one of the more recent projects that we've done was in collaboration with Texas A&M University and a graduate student that came to study the populations of alligators at the Nature Center. Cord Eversole came out for 2 summers, and he helped us to collect data about Armand Bayou alligator populations. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting in that, you know, we talk about the Nature Center as being an urban wilderness. When you have animals like alligators, you also have to describe them as being urban alligators.
Right.
And,
oh, yes, very good.
We live in the Bayou City. We're you know, accustomed to driving over those bayous, but a lot of times when we look over the bridge, we don't really stop to think about the abundance of wildlife that lives there. And increasingly, for us as Bayou City residents, we need to understand that apex predator so that hopefully we can coexist. Those animals play a critical role in the ecosystem, as all apex predators do. Mm-hmm. And alligators really are relatively poorly understood, okay, even though they are big, powerful, impressive animals. You know, there's a lot to be learned about them. So we had the opportunity to produce a video short with Pasadena Cable Channel. Oh, cool. And Cord and I and some of the other Nature Center staff had an opportunity to go out and do some research and produce this video. So let's watch that now.
Believe it or not, there's been very little research done on the American alligator.
Alligators were an endangered species for many years, and due to the appropriate environmental regulations that protected them and the habitat that they depend on, they made a recovery and have over the decades slowly recovered here in Armand Bayou.
It's always good to respect them and give them their space because they can be dangerous.
If you do use respect and common sense when you're paddling in Armand Bayou, you keep a safe distance, you don't feed alligators. It's a very beautiful experience to be in water that has that complete assembly of all of the animals, including those big apex predators.
If you stay out of their way and you know, you don't harass them or anything like that, then you have absolutely nothing to worry about.
Never had an incident with one. And I come out here a lot, probably twice a week.
Alligators every summer build a nest on the high, dry land.
There's some tracks here on the bank and some claw marks where she's been pulling herself up the bank.
Female alligator generally stays very close to it.
That's probably when they're the most dangerous, is during the nesting season. Female alligator in the trap.
Got to be one we've already caught.
I think it is.
She had been in the trap before, so this is actually the second time she got trapped.
This one had, I guess, knocked the transmitter off.
They could be on the brink pretty quickly again if they're not well understood and properly managed.
By collecting this data, we can better manage the species, make it easier to make decisions to conserve them for future generations.
You think all we have to do is recrimp, huh?
That's probably all we're going to have to do, but...
So we ought to go ahead and pre-cut our wire links and have all our material ready to go here. Cord is the man that really has the extensive amount of experience handling alligators.
Just in this study alone, I have over 200 animals tagged, including the ones with the transmitters.
You got to stay on your toes. You got to use quick, common judgment, good sense, common judgment in the process of it. And if you think it's not safe, you just got to let it all go and try again another day.
As soon as she got out of the pipe, nobody on the team missed a beat. We were right on her and had her restrained. Somebody hold this rope.
Yeah, catch cold.
It's important to keep calm. Once you start panicking and questioning your decisions, that's whenever you can get in trouble.
I have a great amount of respect for what he does because he made it look easy today, but that's because Cord has really handled a lot of alligators through the process of this study.
We've tagged her with a radio telemetry transmitter,
which allows us to actually track the movement of the animal. So it lets us establish the range of where they're going and how they're behaving.
It doesn't hurt. It's attached through, to the scutes on the back of her neck, which is made out of bone, and there's not much feeling in it. And so it's a pretty non-invasive way of tagging them.
The data is really critical because we really don't have much of a handle on what alligators are doing here or how many of them that there are here on Armand Bayou.
It's important to get in there and do things like that to be able to collect this data. It's the only way you're going to get it, is to get down and get dirty.
We really don't know exactly how much alligators move around, so it's important information to help us understand the species and to help ensure that we manage the population adequately.
Mark, that's a lot closer to an alligator than I think most people would really ever want to get.
Yeah, that's true. Not recommended for the average person. But if you want to come take a guided canoe trip or a tour on one of our pontoon boat eco tours from a safe distance, you can capture a picture and take that home with you.
And I don't need to bring my duct tape in my backpack?
Do not need to bring the duct tape.
Oh, man.
Well, it turns out that given the right habitat, some of the most unexpected and beautiful forms of wildlife in America not just coexist here, actually thrive in one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country.
So you don't need to go to Florida to see alligators or to the Tetons to see bald eagles. You can just come right here to Armand Bayou Nature Center and see them within a 30-minute drive of your own home.